Welcome to the latest in our webinar series, Embracing the New Normal with CCS Candy. The current unprecedented times have brought about much change, including the way we all work in a new COVID-19 world. While taking care of the health and safety of our valued workforce, the required changes are going to have a huge impact on time and money, and that is where CCS Candy can take control. So today we're going to consider the impact of the latest site operating procedures on productivity, program, procurement and preliminaries, and what Candy can do to help you analyse and mitigate the effects. We're going to be looking at the use of cost worksheets to assess and analyse the effects on reduced productivity, the use of the link between the estimate and Candy planning to assess and analyse the effects on material delivery dates, the use of the link between the estimate and Candy planning to assess and analyse the effects on preliminaries. And finally, we're going to look at the effects of all of the above on the project forecast of cost to complete. Today, we're going to be using our demonstration job. So we're going to start off in a tender version of the job, just to establish some of the principles around what we're going to talk about. So what we've done in this job, we've taken an estimate, and at the bottom, we've added our indirect costs. So in Candy, to give you full post-tender control, you need to have the indirect costs added to the bottom of the direct cost bill. And this will give us trade totals display, and we can see we've got a net amount of 4.54 million. This estimate has been linked to a program. So on the planning tab, on the program manager, we have a program, tender program linked to estimate. So we have a program, and again, we've added to the bottom of the construction program, we've added the indirect costs program. So we have all our indirect costs programmed out. So we make use of the link between the estimate and the planning system in Candy, but to use it properly, we need to ensure that the linking has been completed. So we're looking at the link and forecast tab, and there's a linking document, which is a bill of quantities led document, but it has the links to the program activities alongside each bill item. But an important thing to ensure is that the program and the bill are fully linked. We have this column here called total quantity over under, and I can right click on that column heading and do a filter on the over under allocation. And what I'm looking for is a message, no items found to match this filter. That means that all the bill items have been successfully linked to somewhere in the program. So that's one of the important checks that you need to carry out. The other concept we're going to look at before we start progressing this job are the different codings that we are going to use. So clicking on the blue hammer icon to call up the definitions menu, and the three codes that we're going to make use of in this example are the bill codes, which offer us a locational or geographical control, the task codes, which are a task or activity based code, and finally the cost codes, which are resource based ledger codes, and these would tie up with your cost and accounting system. So we can just have a quick look at where we use these codes within Candy. So two of the codes are allocated against items in the bill of quantities. So on the estimating tab, calling up the estimating document manager, And one of the standard layouts we have is bill with codes and factors. And you can see here we've got our bill of quantities with the bill code column, description and factor, and then the task code column, description and factor. So I can check if the allocation is complete by going to one of the code columns and right-clicking on the code column, and I can run a filter for blanks, and that would show me if there were any bill items that were not fully coded up. And again, looking for that message there, no items found to match this filter. And again, I would do the same on the task code. Filter for blanks, no items found. So all of my bill items have been correctly coded up with both a bill code and a task code. I should just say that in this example, I'm using all three codes, bill codes, task codes, and cost codes, which we'll look at in a minute. But on any given job, you can use any combination of those codes for project management. So any one of them, any two of them, or all three of them to suit the particular project. Okay, so the cost codes are allocated to the resources. So again, we're going on to the estimating document manager and then onto the resources tab. And again, we're going into one of the standard layouts, all codes and attributes. And that'll show me my resource list. And again, I've got my cost code column here. Okay, one of the significant things with resources is that you allocate cost codes only to simple resources. They should not be allocated to complex resources, because the way the system works is it will only analyze down to the point at which the code is allocated. So if you take a simple example, if you take a piece of plant with the hire of the plant and the diesel fuel and the operator, if you cost code the complex resource for the piece of plant, it means all of the money generated by all of the components on that complex worksheet will go to the single cost code. Whereas in reality, you would probably have separate cost codes for plant hire, for fuel, and for operators or labor. Okay, so you can see there's lots of complex resources in this list which don't have cost codes. Again, you can use a filter. So the first thing you can do is filter on simple resources. So I can go to the menu option, view, filter, and then resources that are simple. So that will only show me the simple resource. Okay, so I position my cursor in the cost code column, and on the filter toolbar, I can click the plus sign to run a second filter on the simple resources which are already filtered. And it asks me to apply the filter to the current column. And then again, I want to reduce by keeping blanks. And it doesn't display anything. So it means that there's no blanks within the simple resources. Abandon the filter. Okay, let's close that document down. So where this leads to is, if we go to the Link and Forecast tab, and then heading towards the Document Manager, we're heading towards Financial Forecasts. Okay, if we go to this document here, Bill with Quantity Forecast, we firstly need to import the forecast from a program. So this would be an initial step when you set up a forecast in Candy. And you pick your program from your program manager, tender program linked to estimate. and that will now populate the forecast document, forecast into my reporting periods. We can look at that information in a different way. If I go back to the Lincoln Forecast Document Manager, we're going to make use of the layout 1.2 allowable amounts forecast. Now what this document does is it summarizes that forecast information into your coding structure. So you can see there on the left hand side I've got the 3 columns for the 3 codes I'm using: the bill code, the task code and the cost code. And for each code combination it gives me a breakdown into, on this document, money. So because this job is unprogressed, there's no to date values, so there's a remaining set of values and an at completion set of values, and at the moment they are the same numbers. So you can see there the job total is the same number we saw earlier on the trade totals display, 4.54 million, and again these numbers are all forecast into the reporting periods. Click on the graph button. This little table up in the top left here, at the moment there are 2 curves on this document. There's the earned value curve and the actual cost curve, and they are reflecting exactly the same values. So there are 2 curves exactly positioned on top of each other. There's a third curve there. We need to save a planned value curve. So I'm just going to do that before we get progressing this job. In Lincoln Forecast, on the main menu, we come down to cost and allowables, and we're going to click on the option Store Allowables Base. And that'll store a base forecast for this project. So when that's completed, click on the graph button again. You can see now that the third set of values have been filled out into the planned value column. So this would be your starting position using Lincoln Forecast or cost and allowables in Candy before you walk onto site. So you've got 3 sets of curves: your planned value, which is your baseline, your earned value, which will change as the scope changes, as the program changes, the shape and the size of the earned value curve will change, and the actual cost curve will change as you start importing actual costs from your cost and accounting system. So at the moment, all 3 of those curves are exactly the same value. Now, if we go back to the job manager, what we've actually done here is we've progressed this job by 3 months. So let's go and have a look at what that looks like before we start analysing the effects of COVID-19 on our project. So we're now in the valuations part of the system. So there's a couple of things I'm just going to draw your attention to. The first thing is we have added some variation orders. So right down at the bottom of the bill, I've created a section at the bottom for compensation events, and I've created some additional items which I've priced. They've got the appropriate bill codes and task codes, and they've got some variation order coding. So I can alter the status of these. The purpose of this exercise is not to talk too much about that at this stage. It's just to illustrate that there's extra value in this job because we've added in some compensation events. In terms of the program, we have progressed, again, the program by 3 months worth of progress. And then when we look at that in terms of the progress bar chart, you can see we've got elapsed time, which is the orangey coloured background there, up to the 24th of April. And you can see we've got progress against various activities. So an activity can only find itself in one of three positions. If an activity is 100% complete, it'll have an actual start and an actual finish, and it's fully to the left of the time now line, which is the division between historical and future. A bar can be straddling time now, so it's started but it hasn't finished, so it will have an actual start date and a remaining duration in working days, or an activity can be fully to the right of time now. In other words, it hasn't started yet, so it'll have no progress information, no actual start finish information. So in terms of our cost and allowables model, so cost and allowables is the post-tender side of Lincoln Forecast. So we can go and have a look at our information. Incidentally, these documents, if you see the writing is blue on them, it means they're currently updated. If the writing is in red, it needs to be updated. So you can import the forecast from a program, as we did before. So you import or you update this forecast with the latest information from the program. So if we go back to the cost and allowables document manager, again, using our layout 1.2 allowables amounts forecast, you can see now we've started to get some to-date information. So 3 months worth of progress. We've earned in total £542,876. We've got some 4,017,000 remaining, and we've got an at completion figure now, which is higher than it was previously. It was 4.54 million earlier, but we've added in some compensation events, so that has increased. If we look at the information on the graph again, you can see now that the three curves, which were all identical in the tender version of this forecast, are now starting to come apart. So you can see there we're at month 3. So in terms of our planned value, we should have achieved 650,000. We've only actually earned 542,000, but it's cost us 556,000. So that will give us our SPI and CPI percentages, and you can see those at the bottom left of this screen here. So our to date CPI and SPI there, 0.98 CPI, which is the ratio of our cost to value, and 0.83, which is the ratio of the planned to earned value. So 1 is parity, less than 1 is you're behind program, you're not performing to the required productivity. Greater than 1, you're ahead of program. Okay, so we're going to come back and revisit this model when we've had a look at the effects of the COVID exercises we're going to have a look at now. So just make a mental note there that the actual cost, the projected actual cost, which is a combination of the actual cost to date, so the 556235 number has actually been imported from the cost and accounting software. And then the balance of the cost curve is the projection of the earned value curve. So we've got a projected outturn cost of 45599.99, so just a tad under 4.6 million. And that's the number we're going to be keeping an eye on once we start doing these exercises to analyze the effects of COVID. Okay, so let's close down some of the. So the first exercise we're going to do is the use of cost worksheets to assess and analyze the effects on reduced productivity. So heading towards the valuation system, And then we're going on to the Valuations Document Manager, which is the blue book in the top left. And we're going to make use of one of our standard layouts, layout 5.1, resources per bill item. So there's our bill of quantities. So this document opens up with the resources displayed against each bill item, but it opens out with the resources displayed to complex level. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to expand the level of detail to display simple resources. And the way we do that is we right click on the resource code column heading and go to the menu column options, followed by complexes analyzed to simple resources. And that will expand the resource list out for each bill item. Now we're scrolling through the bill and we're looking at this bill item here. So page 2.1, item L, C20 concrete in foundations. So we're going to concentrate on our labourer resource. So we've got a resource there, code 2211 for a labourer. Now, so looking at the labourer, we've got a rate of 18 per hour. And you can see there's two sets of columns. There's the net columns, net usage remaining and net amount remaining. And we've got cost columns, cost usage remaining and cost amount remaining. And the figures in those two sets of columns are the same. So we've got a usage of 5627 hours of this labourer against this bill item and a cost of 101,285. So what we're going to do, we're going to call up the cost worksheet. Now, the cost worksheets in Candy are initially identical to the net worksheet. In other words, we use exactly the same information that the estimator has used to put the original bid together. Once you make a change to this worksheet, it will be stored separately from the estimator's worksheet and can be changed and updated independently of the estimator's worksheet. So before we change this, we can just see there the rate of this worksheet is 219.54. And we can see there that the estimator has used a placing gang, Ganger plus 6, at a rate of 25 cubic meters a day. Okay. So with the new working guidelines on site, social distancing, let's say that we can't get the same productivity out of our concrete placing gang that the estimator had allowed for. So we're going to change that output to 20 cubic meters per day. And you can see there on the worksheet, the rate has changed to 231.15. Now I need to store this change. So I'm going to store the worksheet. Now we're back on the bill of quantities document. Just going to hit the red calculate button just to make sure the values have been recalculated. And you can see there that the usage, cost usage for the labourer has increased from 5627 to 6680 because of the change I've just made on that worksheet. Okay. Let's see what we can do to mitigate that increase in labour. Again, if I call up the cost worksheet, let's do a what if scenario. What if we try using a slightly smaller concrete placing gang and they might be able to work more efficiently in the restricted working space, adhering to COVID-19 social distancing rules. So I'm going to make a new resource. So if I go to the resource list, which is the piece of paper with the R on it, and I'm going to scroll down to my labour gangs. A useful Little trick in Candy estimating is the ability to clone resources, and that applies to both simple resources and complex resources. And I can do that either by adding a character on the end of a code or by changing a character within a code. So I'm going to change the character at the end of my concrete placing gang, and you can see there that has created a clone. I just need to edit the resource now. So change the description to a ganger +4, and then I need to edit the rate. So double click on the final rate to open up the complex worksheet, and I'm just going to reduce the number of laborers in that gang from 6 to 4. And again, I have to store that complex resource. And we've now got a smaller concrete placing gang costing a slightly lower amount of money. So back on the worksheet, I can position my cursor on the concrete placing gang, which is there, and I can use the control and up arrow, and that will now bring in the new concrete placing gang resource. Obviously, the smaller gang aren't going to achieve the same output as the larger gang, so let's reduce that output again from 20 down to 16 cubic meters per day. And again, we can see the new rate now of 225.41. So when I store that worksheet, you can see now and I'll calculate, you can see the cost usage remaining has now changed to 5802. So it's not as good as the estimator's figure, it's not as low as the estimator's figure, but we have mitigated most of the effects of the first change that we made. So far, this exercise assumes that the hourly rate for the labour remains at 18 per hour. But what we're going to look at now is making use of the resource cost rate, so we can have a look at the effect of that. So just make a note at the moment, the remaining cost amount for the labourer against this bill item is 104,444. Okay, so heading towards the valuations document manager. And this time we're going to the resources tab. And on the resources tab, using one of the standard layouts, 2.3 resource list with cost rates. So this is our resource list with 2 rate columns. The final rate column is the rates that the estimator has used to put the bid together. We have this second rate column called the cost rate, and you can see at the moment the cost rate reflects the estimator's rate, and the little orange marker there indicates that. So again, I can independently change the cost rate. So let's use our labourer again as an example, code 2211. So we've got an hourly rate of 18, which was the estimator's rate. So we're going to change the cost rate to 20. Let's say, you know, the labour resources, they might have to take extra time, putting on extra PPE, traveling to work, generally not allowed to travel with their colleagues in the same vehicle. They have to try and travel separately, all the social distancing measures that you have to apply. So there's going to be an impact on the hourly rate of your operative. So we've increased the labourer from 18 to 20. So when I close that resource list down, click back on the bill of quantities and calculate, you can see now the remaining cost amount has increased to 116,049. So again, we can see an immediate effect of the increase in the hourly rate of the labour cost. I should say, incidentally, the cost rates for both the resources and the cost worksheets only apply to remaining work. So any work which is already being completed won't be changed. It's only remaining work. The same with the resources. It only affects the remaining resources that you've got left to use. Any historical resources will have been used at the previous rate that they were at. Okay. Right, we're just going to have a look at the effect on our forecast of this change now. Close this document down and head back to the cost and allowables. Heading back to the cost and allowables document manager, and we're going into the bill with quantity forecast document. I'm just going to update the information anyway, so I'm going to import the forecast from the program, and I'm importing progress from month 3, and then back on the allowable amounts forecast document. Okay, and we're looking at the graph. And you can see we were sitting at a number, our outturn cost was just under 4.6 million. It's now increased to 4,740 because of the two things we did there, the increase in the cost of the concrete bill item and the increase in the hourly rate of the labourer. And you can see quite clearly now on the graphs, the red dotted curve when we get to the contract end is quite a bit higher than the planned value and the earned value. Okay. Right, just going to close down document. And we're now heading towards our second example, which is the use of the link between the estimate and Candy planning to assess and analyse the effects on material delivery, which is a BOQ with the resource usage forecast. Again, this opens up the bill of quantities, showing me the resources for each bill item, but this time scheduled out into our reporting periods. Again, the document opens with the resources closed up to complex levels, so we're going to expand that to simple resources by right-clicking on the resource code column and then to the column options, followed by complex as analysed to simple resources. And then we're scrolling through the bill. And then again, we're going to make use of our bill item 2.1, item L, or C20 concreting foundations. So this time we're going to have a look at one of our material resources. So we're going to concentrate on code 51413, 19mm aggregate. Got a total usage of 1900 cubic meters. And you can see at the moment the requirement for this resource is spread across a 6-week period from the 15th of May through to the 19th of June. And we can see there in the second week there's a maximum requirement of 781 cubic meters of that resource in that week. Okay. So because of COVID-19 and lockdown, your material suppliers will either be on slow working or maybe shut down completely. So we're going to have a look at the effects of the slower productivity on the material delivery requirements for this material. So the first thing we need to do is we need to establish which program activities are linked to this bill item. So on the Link and Forecast tab, we're heading back to the linking document. And if we scroll down to page 2.1, item L, you can see there the 3 activity numbers, 0120, 0130 and 0150 are the activities which are linked to this bill item. So we can now go to the program, the bar chart. So again, on the link and forecast tab, I can access that by using the bar chart icon. And I can find my 3 activities there. So there are 2 ways we can alter this. So because of reduced productivity, these activities durations are going to take longer. So 2 ways of doing it. I can go to a duration. So at the moment, activity 0120 construct footings has a duration of 20. I can simply overtype that and put a longer duration in there of 30. Or I can go to the cable trench floor, which is the second of the activities which I want to look at, and I can go to the end of the bar, position my cursor at the end of the bar till I get this little symbol, the vertical line with the double-headed arrow on it, and I can click and drag to the right or left to increase or decrease the duration of that activity. So again, I'm going to increase the duration from 20 to 30 days. And then finally, 0150, which is my fan base. At the moment, it's got a duration of 40 days. It has in fact started, so that's fine. But what I'm going to do, I'm going to again increase the remaining duration from 37 to 47. So I'm adding 10 days to the end of the activity. And then I'm going to reschedule by hitting the red calculate button. Now, if I head back to the link and forecast document manager, again, heading into the layout 4.3 BOQ with resource usage forecast. And again, I need to expand the resource detail out to simple resources. And heading down to page 2.1, item L. There's the item there. Right, so if we have a look now at our 19mm aggregate, total requirement hasn't changed. It's still 1900 cubic meters. But if we look at the time scale, the requirement for that resource now spreads over a time period 9 weeks long. It was 6 weeks, it's now over 9 weeks. So it's reduced the requirement of that resource. And if you look at the second period there, it was just over 780 cubic meters in that 1 week. It's now reduced that maximum requirement to just under 530 cubic meters in that week. So overall, it's reduced the peak requirements of that resource and spread it over a long time period, thereby reducing the pressure on the supply chain to deliver. So that brings us to the end of our second example. So we'll just go and have a quick look on the effect of the forecast. Back into cost and allowables, and back into the document manager, and then onto the layout bill with quantity forecast. Again, because the writing's blue here, I don't actually need to update it again. Back to the document manager and allowable amounts forecast, and then the graph button. Now, this isn't actually going to have an effect on the overall values because we haven't added any extra money in by spreading the period over which we need that 19mm aggregate. But within the shape of this curve, there would have been some slight alteration, but you would never spot that in, in this graph. This is a summary graph. Okay, so that concludes the second example. Now, the third example involves us in our preliminaries. I'm going to close these documents down. So the first thing we're going to consider is an increasing cost. So going towards the valuations part of the system, and then clicking on the icon for the valuation bill, and then right down at the bottom of the bill, we've got our indirect cost section. So we've got our project manager item there. We're going to use the cost worksheet now for the project manager. So because this has come originally from indirect costs, there's detail on these worksheets, so you can include as much detail or as little detail as you want to. We're going to add some extra content to this. So again, the project manager and all the other members of staff are probably going to have to involve themselves wearing more PPE than they would normally do, different PPE. So it's going to have an effect on their price. So we're going to make a new resource. So we're going to add a new resource for a PPE allowance. So I'm going to do it within my preliminary section. I've got some general allowances there. So I'm just going to go in and make a new code. And again, I can clone a code. So let's make this 1999. Again, I'm going to categorize it as preliminaries, and I'm going to call it PPE COVID allowance. And it's going to be a rate of 1. Okay. So then I can add that new resource to the project manager's cost worksheet, and I want to make an allowance of, let's say, £500 a month. Probably a bit generous, but it'll illustrate the point. And then I'm going to store that worksheet. So remember, the project manager, for the months he or she have been on site, that change will not affect any historical value that's been declared against that bill item. It'll only affect remaining work. So we're already declaring 22% of the project manager's value. That won't be affected. It'll be the remaining 78% that will be affected by that change. Cost and allowables. Back to the document manager. And again, we don't need to update anything. It's already updated. And we're going back to the layout. 1.2, allowable amounts forecast. And again, we're going to use the graph button at the bottom. We can see the value has increased again. So it's now taken on board the extra money for the additional PPE and the extra cost of the project manager being on site that bit longer. Well, that brings us to the end of this webinar. I hope you found it useful. But if you've got any questions, email them through and we'll get them answered for you as soon as possible. Thank you for attending, and goodbye.